Why would the Khmer be prepared to devote so much of their year toiling in the king's name?
Why was it that the peasantry out there in the fields contributed so much labour, willingly it seems, to the maintenance of the centre? And the answer may well be that they really believed that the king was a god, and they were working in the service of the deity, and this kept them going.
Oh, I think without a doubt, I fully agree with you. You couldn't have built the city of Angkor without that kind of firm belief.
But although the Khmer people dedicated enormous effort into constructing their great city, it was the addition of slave labor that made it possible. Zhou describes these unfortunates.
Wild men from the hills can be bought to serve as slaves. Families of wealth may own more than 100. Those of lesser means content themselves with 10 or 20. Only the very poor have none.
We know, too, again from the inscriptions, that some of them had a very raw deal. There was one who tried to escape from the land in which he was born and was assigned, and they found him and they brought him back and they gouged his eyes out and cut off his ears.
Punishment was severe for all subjects of Angkor, noted the Chinese diplomat.
In very serious cases, a ditch is dug outside the city. The criminal is dropped into it. Earth and stones are heaped on top until he is buried alive. Lesser crimes are dealt with by cutting off feet or hands, or by amputating the nose.
The economy of Angkor was based on international trade. The Khmers produced food for their swelling population, but there was a surplus for trade with neighboring states. They wove fine cloth, cast huge bronze statues, and exported ivory, kingfisher feathers, beeswax, and scented wood. Their main trading partner was China.
The reliefs at the Bayonne reveal a Chinese trade junk coming across the waters of the Great Lake just south of Angkor. And we know that there was indeed a great deal of trade going on because of the more recent archaeological research that has been excavating in the Royal Palace, and there they've been unearthing a considerable quantity of Chinese ceramics.
Zhou Daguan's delegation were not the only Chinese in Angkor. In fact, Chinese settlers had been there for years.
The Chinese always take a wife here as soon as they arrive, deriving additional benefit from the woman's business skills. In Cambodia, it is the women who take charge of trade. There are no shops in which the merchants live. Instead, they display their goods on matting spread on the ground.
Women held positions of power and authority. They owned property, engaged in trade, and even served as bodyguards to the king. But the Chinese interest in Cambodian women was not driven solely by trade.
Everyone with whom I talked said that the Cambodian women are highly sexed. 1 or 2 days after giving birth to a child, they are ready for intercourse. If a husband is not responsive, he will be discarded.
By the end of the 13th century, Angkor was at its peak. A succession of god kings had built this beautiful and astonishing city. A sophisticated water system made the city work, fed its people, and created wealth. But then, at its very peak, cracks in the system began to appear. Cracks that would lead to the city being abandoned to the jungle. It took nearly 500 years for Angkor to grow to the vast city that the Chinese diplomat Zhou Daguan described in 1296. Yet just a century later, the city lay deserted, given up to the jungle. But why? Throughout history, there are few examples of cities being totally abandoned. One key factor is known. Throughout Angkor's history, the Khmer had waged war with their neighbors. In the early years of Angkor, the Vietnamese Chams were the Khmer's sworn enemies. Most of the temple walls around the capital depict epic battles against the Chams. But by the time of Zhou Daguan's visit, the main threat came from the emerging Thai kingdom of Siam as it expanded into Cambodia. He recounts,
Recently, during the war with Siam, whole villages have been laid waste.
in the diplomat's eyes, the Khmer army was ill-prepared for war.
Soldiers move about unclothed and barefoot. In the right hand is carried a lance, in the left a shield. They have no bows, no missiles, no breastplates, and no helmets. Generally speaking, these people have neither discipline nor strategy.
Inscriptions show that in 1431, the Thais sacked Angkor. They looted everything possible, enslaving much of the population, including the king's entire harem, and carried them off to Thailand. Abandoned, the city of Angkor was slowly reabsorbed into the jungle from which it had emerged 5 centuries before. Henri Mouot wrote in 1860, "One must ask, what has become of this powerful race, so civilized and enlightened to create these gigantic works?" The conventional explanation is that the empire's rulers lost their grip on power, and the Thais simply scared them off. But the mystery of Angkor takes another twist. Today, archaeologists believe that there were other factors at work. Charles Hyam points to the great builder king, Jayavarman VII.
Perhaps because of the excesses of Jayavarman VII, who clearly was a builder with a frenzy of activity. And he may well, it's said, and it might be true, that he exhausted the resources of the state and it went into a decline.
Jayavarman VII was the first Buddhist king after several hundred years of Hindu worship. This more compassionate religion may have given the Khmer cause to reflect on the excesses of their kings.
And I wonder whether, in fact, the slow decline that may well have set in was the result of a lack of belief out in the fields there that the king was in fact a deity, and that this vital link between the two began to fray.
Jacques Gaucher theorizes that while the Khmer's success can be attributed to the harnessing of water, it could also have led to their undoing. Such was the fine balance of nature that if irrigation and the storage of water were not kept up, they could easily fall into disrepair.
The water system was very fragile because it was so sophisticated. And the problem is, if it's not well maintained, it could easily become blocked by sediment.
The kings who came after Jayavarman VII were less interested in grand building plans. It's also possible they stopped maintaining the intricate water system. Deforestation was also a likely contributor. So much jungle had been cut back for rice growing that undoubtedly the rivers and canals would have silted up, which in turn would have led to an ecological disaster for the Khmer. Christophe Potier believes the clues are obvious.
The pound is very clear there with the water. At the end of Angkor, it's pieces of the forest should have been very, very rare. So deforestation is not a new problem. It's an old one.
It is most likely that it was a combination of these factors that led the Khmer to abandon their once great city. What remained of the Khmer court re-established itself on the banks of the Mekong, near Cambodia's present-day capital of Phnom Penh.
We're not talking about the actual collapse and total demise of a civilization. What happened was that they moved sensibly to the east, down to the Mekong River, and away from the Thais.
Now completely Buddhist, renouncing material wealth, the Khmer would never again embrace the lofty heights they had in Angkor. For 400 years, Angkor lay derelict and forgotten, until its rediscovery by Henri Mouot in 1860. Today, Angkor is recognized as a wonder of the world. In Cambodia's new era of stability, archaeologists from around the world continue to make fresh discoveries. At last, a world lost to the jungle is re-emerging. A major metropolis that for over half a millennium dominated a thriving empire. One of the greatest cities the world has ever known.